Well, you know, when I say that the West lies all the time, that they do nothing but lie, and that they literally can't help it. They really literally can't help it because they are fundamentally and foundationally estranged from the truth. They don't have access to it, you know. I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm not just lashing out at the West or something. No, you have to understand this is factually accurate. It's true. And there are massive, complex ramifications from this fact. You know, you can't just say that the West are all liars and then click your tongue in contempt. Do you understand? There are whole systems of thought, systems of government based on those systems of thought, academic disciplines, fields of study, you know, economic, political, societal frameworks, and interpretive paradigm for understanding the world, all of which we have adopted. We've adopted it and taken it seriously, and all of that has been built by and for a so-called civilization that lies about everything. This is a disaster.
Hello guys, welcome once again to AfriPost. I hope wherever you are, you're having a great time. Now, one of the reasons why I always love Shahid Bolsen is the fact that he likes venturing in areas that people do not want to go to. For example, I've always taken his monologues or the analysis that he gives as geopolitical analysis of current affairs, but I was really surprised when I was watching one of his videos where he was talking about the realignment of the global power structures. And he kind of indicated that whatever he's doing in that clip is not undertaking a geopolitical analysis, but he's essentially conducting a forensic audit to understand who truly controls the world. And this is really something that needs to be done, because if we don't know who calls the tune, then we will not be able to understand what is awaiting us in future. And that is why sometimes I like bringing people like him for you to really understand some of the hidden intrigues of how global power structures are being reshaped as we are today. In this clip that I'm going to play to you today, he's talking about the realignment of the global power structures in terms of how the hidden architecture of global power is being maneuvered through over the years. I want us to listen to this clip that is quite eye-opening. Then we shall come back in the end and discuss a little bit. So let's watch.
Well, you know, when I say that the West lies all the time, that they do nothing but lie, and that they literally can't help it. They really literally can't help it because they are fundamentally and foundationally estranged from the truth. They don't have access to it, you know. I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm not just lashing out at the West or something. No, you have to understand this is factually accurate. It's true. And there are massive, complex ramifications from this fact. You know, you can't just say that the West are all liars and then click your tongue in contempt. Do you understand? There are whole systems of thought, systems of government based on those systems of thought, academic disciplines, fields of study, you know, economic, political, societal frameworks, and interpretive paradigm for understanding the world, all of which we have adopted. We've adopted it and taken it seriously, and all of that has been built by and for a so-called civilization that lies about everything. This is a disaster. I don't think you understand. It's like if you were a contractor, say, or an architect, you know, a builder, and you get hired to build a house. Someone hires you to build a house or to build a structure on a certain plot of land. Okay, now the one who hired you is giving you all sorts of strange demands, odd instructions, you know, farcical requests and stipulations of how he wants the building to look like, how he wants it to be. And you do what he wants. You follow all his instructions, and then he changes his mind. And then you need to redo the work. You know, you do all of these time-consuming, tedious things that he's asking for. And finally, the house or the structure is built, but it's not architecturally sound. It's structurally flimsy. Nothing works. Stairs go to nowhere. The plumbing is tangled. The electrical wiring doesn't work. It's all a mess. On and on. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to you as an architect, as a builder, until you find out that the man who hired you is actually criminally insane and he murdered dozens of people. That's why he wanted you to build a house. You thought you were building a house, but all you were actually doing was building something to hide the bodies. All you did was cover a mass grave. And that man didn't care whatsoever if anything in that building worked at all. All it needed to do for him was to conceal his crimes. Do you see? That's the West. But now you're taking all of those instructions of that criminally insane person and putting them into your textbooks, putting them into your schools, into your minds, even though all of those instructions were only given for one purpose, to conceal his victims, to misdirect and to conceal, to deflect and to conceal his victims. It was never about building a sound structure. It was always just a cover-up. Once you realize that, then you realize that everything that you got from him is useless. I mean, it's useless to you. It's useful for them for the reasons that I mentioned, but it's useless for you because it's all lies. It's all based on lies. Your sociology, your economics, your political philosophy, your political science, your theories of this and that and the other. No, it turns out it was all just a cover-up. GDP is not a measure of a healthy economy. That's like measuring someone's bicep to try to measure how strong they are. But see, that's exactly why they do it. That's exactly why they do what they do. Cover up and misdirection. Military spending is not doesn't show you how strong your military is, but that's what they want you to measure, and that's what they want you to think that you are measuring, is the strength. You see, it's all cover up and misdirection. You see what I mean? Their whole so-called civilization, the core of the rot of their so-called civilization, and the core is rotten. The core of it has always been that they have never understood properly how to assign value to anything. They give value to what is worthless, and they treat as worthless what is valuable. And they do that in every sphere. Okay, so we're talking about a whole system of thought, a whole system of government based on that system of thought, economics based on that system of thought, and so on. All built on lies, misdirection, confusion, and misassignment of value. Why, it's a worthless system. It's a useless system. It's a rotten system. And you and I are going to have to come up with our own system, our own thought, our own fields of study, our own disciplines, our own way of understanding the world, our own paradigms, our own interpretation of reality based on our own sources of knowledge. And I mean, you have to dismantle everything that they gave you, everything that they gave you for understanding the world. You need to remove that lens that they gave you to look through, because it just distorts everything. Have you ever put on someone's glasses, right? Someone's glasses that aren't your prescription. Prescription glasses that are not designed for your eyes, not designed for your vision. Well, you can't see in those glasses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you prescription lenses. He gave you exactly the prescription that you need. And if you try to wear any other lenses, it will only make your vision worse, and you'll be walking around blind. Especially those Western lenses, because in fact, they didn't give you anything but blindfolds. That's what they gave you. They gave you a blindfold and called it glasses. But once you take the blindfold off, you take off those blinders, and you get your prescription lenses back on, then you can start to see the way things really are. So for instance, for me, with Middle Nation, with my content, I know it doesn't fit into any standard categories. Is it analysis? Is it commentary? Is it forecasting? Is it critique? Is it political? Is it economic? Is it social? Is it left? Is it right? On and on. Let me just clarify something about that. The kind of analysis that I do, people generally describe it as, and I've even described it myself as, geopolitical analysis. But that's not quite accurate. I've only said that because there isn't really a specific field that has a name for what we do. I'm not fundamentally interested in geopolitics as it is traditionally defined. My work, the work of Middle Nation, is focused on the analysis of power dynamics, and then how those power dynamics play out, or how they're likely to play out. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He puts one people in check by means of another people. He said that there are people who are higher ranks than others, that some have what others do not have, and so on. He said that struggles and battles go by turns. All of that has to do with power dynamics and understanding who checks whom in this world, or who predictably could check whom. It seems to be pretty basic information that you're going to need to have if you want to understand what goes on in this world. Geopolitics in the conventional sense tends to fixate on the relations between states, borders, alliances, treaties, military positioning, and so forth, which is basically like looking at the stage and the actors on the stage, but not looking at the directors or the script writers. But the Middle Nation approach goes further than that. We look at who actually has power, regardless of what kind of power that is. Now, that includes state power, but also, of course, it includes private sector power, financial networks, media empires, asset managers, transnational corporate systems. These are not traditionally part of geopolitical analysis, but they're absolutely central to understanding the exercise of real world power. I mean, in my opinion, if you ever listen to an analyst, so-called analyst, talking about politics, talking about geopolitics, and they never factor in corporate power, they never factor in private sector power, the drivers of economies, the real drivers of policy, well, that's an incredibly shallow and ultimately misleading so-called analysis. So whenever you evaluate a situation, you shouldn't be asking, for example, what is the United States government doing? You should be asking, who is shaping the outcome? Who can impose costs? Who can alter behavior without being altered in return? Once you identify the who, then it's not that hard to understand the why, what the desired result is, and try to deduce, given what you know about the who, what are the chances that they're going to be successful? And then what might be done about it? So this could be a country, it could also be a corporation, it could be a consortium or an investor network. So you need a way of gauging real existing power, relative power of any given actor, of any given entity that has influence over policy, or that wields, significant degree of power in any given society. That's why at Middle Nation we developed what we call the Relative Power Index, RPI. The RPI is a model for roughly calculating functional leverage between power entities, or the general standing of any given actor in terms of power relative to others. We built that because the existing metrics, GDP, military size, alliance structures, and so on, these are often misleading. They reflect the appearance of power, not its realistic functionality or its operation, because a country might be rich but dependent. A military might be large but strategically irrelevant. A government might be in office but not in control. So the RPI is designed to identify real influence. It includes factors like decision-making authority. Can you impose binding outcomes? Control of inputs. Do others rely on you for what you control? Narrative control. Can you define reality for others? Immunity to retaliation. In other words, can you act without facing consequences? And your adaptability reserve. Can you survive and pivot through disruption? And it also measures negatives, the vulnerabilities, like direct dependence. How directly dependent are you? What's your exposure to disruption? And what's the perceived vulnerability of your state or your power? And this model is not static, necessarily so. It evolves because power is not frozen. It flows. And as the world shifts from the West to the South, from centralized empires to distributed blocks, the tools that we use to understand power have to try to keep up with those new dynamics. And like I say, everything that they gave us to measure power, well, they designed it so that we would always mismeasure power, so that we would see power where there isn't power and see weakness where there isn't weakness. They never wanted us to understand the real dynamics of power and the real dimensions of power. So that's why even the system that we have for measuring power has to be flexible, because something new might emerge that actually constitutes power that isn't in any existing metric, any existing system of measurement. Something that wasn't powerful 20 years ago or didn't constitute power 20 years ago may constitute power today. So again, like I say, we have to develop our own systems, our own method for identifying what power is and what the relative power is in relation to others. We have to come up with our own formulas. We have to come up with our own system for measuring, because there's a big difference between, for example, looking powerful and being powerful. Those aren't the same thing. That's a distinction that the Middle Nation Relative Power Index is designed to clarify. It sort of cuts through the propaganda. It cuts through the noise, through all the theatrics of foreign policy, all the theatrics of empire. And it answers one question: who has the power to shape outcomes without being shaped in return? That's real power. Not, your military parades, not your fake GDP figures that count debt and billionaires as domestically productive. Real power is about leverage. So the RPI that we have created is a formula for measuring functional dominance. For example, if we apply it to the United States, right now, the U.S. still has some serious muscle left. We can't pretend otherwise. It still has power. It can still impose decisions. on other countries through the IMF, through NATO, through the World Bank, and so on. It still controls key systems, the financial infrastructure, tech platforms, their media empires, and to some extent, trade routes, to some extent. It can still shape reality through narrative, at least in the English language. That's declining. The facade is cracking. Its immunity to retaliation is even slipping. Its adaptability is declining. All of their institutions are too calcified. Their people are too divided. Their infrastructure is too old. The dollar itself is no longer unchallenged. Even its soft power, America's soft power, its reputational authority is collapsing. People see the hypocrisy now. They see the corruption now. They see the cruelty. Okay, so internally, America is dependent on imports, on foreign investment, on immigrant labor, on dollar hegemony. It's fragile. Externally, its enemies and even its allies know how to disrupt it if they want to. Cyber attacks, debt pressure, supply chain chaos. And crucially, no one in the world believes in America anymore. That's called perceived vulnerability. And it's one of the biggest forces right now shaping geopolitics, because the perception of America has always been a major factor in the decision-making and policy-making of other countries around the world. What you think America is, what they can do, what you think they will do, always mattered before. It matters much less today than it ever did. So that's declining. The perceived vulnerability of America is significant and on the rise. So if you add up the formula, our RPI formula, well, America's score comes to around plus 12, which is still powerful, but it's not invincible, and it's shrinking. Unless the U.S. radically changes their direction, its power is going to fall below functional dominance by 2050. That's why we need accurate tools. At Middle Nation, we don't operate on fantasy or emotion. We measure real leverage. Because if you don't know who truly holds power, then you're just reacting blind all the time. You can't craft effective strategies. We're not interested in their stage performance. We're interested in, as I say, the script that's written behind the scenes and who's directing that scene. That's why American power has to be scrutinized carefully. It has to be scrutinized closely to see how much of it they really have. Yes, the United States still has a relative power score, according to our index, of plus 12. It's not insignificant. They still control many levers. But there's a deeper truth here. It's not using that power for itself, not really. America is a host. It's not sovereign. It's a platform, not a state with independent volition. It's an instrument. Their power is no longer nationalistic. It's been instrumentalized by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, what we refer to, as everyone knows, as the OCGFC. And the OCGFC are not patriots. They're not defending America. They're not interested in the welfare of American citizens, or even the longevity of the American state itself. Their allegiance is not to the flag. It's to capital mobility. It's to asset domination and the architecture of global control. Their loyalties are liquid. And what we're witnessing now in America is the systematic extraction of American power by the A-national elites. The A-national elites that got built up by their power in the first place. They built American power via the military-industrial complex, and then they, in turn, were built up by that. But now they've surpassed it. The United States was built into a superpower precisely to serve as the enforcement arm of financialized capitalism, and that project is evolving. The enforcers are now being restructured. The OCGFC no longer need a single hegemon. They want distributed control across cooperative nodes, public-private partnerships, digital infrastructure, security agreements, asset management firms, and so on. So when we calculate that the U.S. still has decision authority, control of inputs, narrative control, you have to ask, but on behalf of whom? The decisions made at the IMF are not made for Main Street. The control over trade routes that they have and supply chains doesn't benefit American workers or American consumers. The narratives that they're pushing in Hollywood or Silicon Valley don't reflect national interests. They reflect global social engineering. The Pentagon is not defending the homeland, it's defending investment portfolios. What this means is that America's RPI is no longer America's. The numbers are still there, but the ownership is not. You understand? The United States has become the strongman for an empire that it does not control, and from which it no longer benefits, really. Its power has been privatized. The state has been hollowed out. It's being used as a transnational tool to establish a new, more flexible system of a national dominance. centered around capital, not countries. So when you hear that America is still powerful, remember this. It's not the United States that's powerful. Not anymore. It's what's operating through the United States. And that's why Middle Nation doesn't just analyze states. We analyze systems of control, systems of power. And increasingly, the state is no longer the center of power. It's an instrument of power. I mean, does the United States government govern the United States, or does BlackRock? You know? We're trained to think of power in terms of presidents and congressmen, politicians, and so on, maybe the Pentagon. But real power is the ability to shape outcomes without being shaped in return, like I said. That's what the Relative Power Index, our RPI, that's what that measures. Not symbolic authority, not popularity, just raw, functional leverage. And if we use this framework to assess, for example, BlackRock versus the United States, well, the results are deeply revealing and deeply disturbing, or that should be for Americans. I mean, start with decision authority. BlackRock isn't a government agency, but it might as well be. I mean, it manages over $10 trillion, $10 trillion in global assets. That means that it has a say in nearly every major U.S. corporation. It advises the Federal Reserve. It has executives embedded in the Treasury. When financial crises hit, Washington doesn't tell BlackRock what to do. BlackRock tells Washington what can be done. So their score is a 7.5 out of 10. That's for decision-making authority, BlackRock, over America. Then you can look at control of inputs. Well, BlackRock controls the flow of capital. It controls pension funds. It controls municipal bond financing. It dictates the so-called ESG compliance. That's not just control of money. That's control of what's built, where it's built, and who's allowed to operate it. So that's an 8.0 out of 10. What about narrative control? Well, BlackRock isn't making movies. They're not running TV stations, but it shapes financial orthodoxy. Through its research arms, through Bloomberg, through think tanks, it decides what counts as sound economics, good governance, responsible investing. They decide that. And if you don't align with their narrative, well, then you don't get any funding. So they get a score of 6 out of 10 on that. Then we can ask, can BlackRock be punished? Are they immune to retaliation? The United States government can't regulate BlackRock without destabilizing its own economy. That's the genius of systemic entrenchment. If you try to pull out, you'll collapse the house. So BlackRock's immunity from retaliation score is a 7 out of 10. And finally, how easily can BlackRock pivot, can restructure to survive outside the U.S.? Well, completely. BlackRock is global, it's liquid, it's anational. If Washington collapses tomorrow, BlackRock just relocates, it reintegrates, and it keeps profiting. So they get a score of 9 out of 10. Now, there's some reliance, sure. It operates within U.S. jurisdictions. It benefits from legal shelter. But that's just a 3 on the direct dependence scale, BlackRock's dependence on America. And their exposure to disruption is practically none. There's no serious movement within the United States capable of regulating or disrupting BlackRock. So the score there is just a 2.5. And the perceived vulnerability of BlackRock? Well, no one sees BlackRock as weak or in decline. If anything, they're perceived as untouchable. So they get a score of 2 out of 10. The final score, according to the RPI of Middle Nation formula, BlackRock's relative power over the United States is plus 30. That's an extraordinary figure. Not only does it outclass the U.S. government's ability to control BlackRock, it surpasses the dominance most empires had over their colonies back in the day. It means we need to stop mistaking governments for the highest authority. No, BlackRock is not elected. It doesn't answer to voters, but it has more functional power over the United States of America than Congress does. That's not conspiracy theory. That's not ideological rhetoric. That's a structural reality. And it exposes a much deeper truth, that Western democracy, so-called, has been hollowed out from the inside. What you see is not what governs, and what actually governs cannot be voted out, and mostly can't even be seen. BlackRock is not an anomaly, it's a prototype, So the question is, who governs your country? And are you sure that it's your government, Americans? Because in America, the answer is no. Your government doesn't govern you. BlackRock governs the United States, not metaphorically, not rhetorically, but functionally. BlackRock has more influence over the American state than the American state has over BlackRock. So what power does the U.S. government have over BlackRock. Do they have any power over BlackRock? Well, we ran that through our RPI system as well. Spoiler alert, they have very little power over BlackRock. And that reveals that the American government is no longer sovereign. Because really, can the American government tell BlackRock what to do? Well, technically, yes, but practically, no. Functionally, no. You know, they could pass regulations, they could threaten antitrust action, but in reality, they don't and they won't. And if they tried, they'd pay the price. BlackRock has lawyers, they have lobbyists, they have leverage in every relevant agency. So relative to BlackRock, we gave the U.S. a 3 out of 10 in decision authority over BlackRock. That's the level of a weak junior partner in a business deal. If the U.S. clamps down, BlackRock just pivots offshore, restructures its portfolios, keeps operating globally. So that's a 2.5 out of 10 in terms of control over inputs. So what about narrative control? I mean, you'd think that the U.S. government, with its media and its institutions, its global cultural dominance and so forth, that they could at least frame the public perception of BlackRock, but no, they don't, and they won't even try. Again, public discourse around BlackRock is marginal. You never see congressional hearings about it. You rarely even hear their name in mainstream public political debates. And when you do, it's vague and sanitized. No one's going to talk about BlackRock. Not to mention all of the media corporations are actually owned by BlackRock. So the U.S. government versus BlackRock in terms of narrative control gets a 3.5. Now we ask, what happens if the U.S. Tries to confront BlackRock? Can they act without fear of blowback from BlackRock? Well, obviously no. Any serious confrontation by the U.S. government against BlackRock would destabilize their pension systems. It would tank their markets. It would trigger capital flight. No, BlackRock is too entangled to attack. That's what you call mutual hostage governance, except the hostage in this case is the government. So there's a score of 2.0 in terms of the ability to retaliate or the ability to control BlackRock. You simply cannot. And can the U.S. adapt with regards to BlackRock? Could they replace BlackRock's role? Could they build alternatives, take back control? Well, not without enormous systemic pain. The state has no institutional substitute for what BlackRock does. You know, management of retirement assets, stabilizing markets, advising the Fed, on and on. So that's a 2.0 on the U.S. government's adaptability reserve. They're stuck. How dependent is the U.S. on BlackRock? On capital, very. On asset management, completely. On market sentiment and investment flows, totally. So their dependency, America's dependency on BlackRock is a 7 out of 10. How vulnerable is the U.S. to disruption by BlackRock? Well, all BlackRock has to do is shift some capital. All they have to do is adjust some ESG compliance ratings or pull out of a market segment, and entire sectors of the economy could collapse. So that's a 6.5 score. How is the U.S. perceived compared to how BlackRock is perceived? Is America seen as strong and in control, or is it seen as weakened, as captured, as subservient to forces that it can no longer discipline? Well, that's a score of 7.0. If you add it all up, the U.S. relative power over BlackRock is negative 7.5. That's negative functional leverage. While BlackRock's relative power over the U.S. is plus 30. It means that America doesn't govern its corporate elite governs America. We need to be clear, this is not partnership, this is occupation. Okay, it's not military occupation, but economic occupation. You have a non-state actor that has greater decision-making power than the state. It can outmaneuver, it can outlast, and it outleverages the government that's supposed to regulate it. No, BlackRock is not an American company. It's a post-national institution. It's a private sovereign. It's a private sovereign embedded in the global system. Oh, but it gets worse. It gets worse for America. America's current power is no longer its own. As we said, it's been captured. It's been subordinated to the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. They still have power, but it's not their own. But even that status, as the strong man of the OCGFC, even that status is temporary because the role itself is being phased out. The United States is being decommissioned. Understand? Not destroyed, not invaded, but strategically disassembled, gradually and deliberately by the very elites who once empowered it. Because their system is evolving beyond the need, as I said, for a single hegemon. This isn't a theory. We can map it. We've done it. Using the Middle Nation Relative Power Index, we've projected the trajectory of the United States all the way up to the year 2050. And the result is quite sobering, or it should be for American citizens. I mean, right now, America's RPI is plus 12, like I said. By 2050, it drops to -7. A negative RPI means that the United States will be more vulnerable than it is dominant. It means that it will be shaped more than it shapes others. It will act less and be acted upon more. Okay, it will still have weapons, it will still have wealth, but it won't have control. Decision authority will be gone. Global governance is fragmenting. BRICS Plus, alternative institutions, regional pacts are rendering U.S. power frameworks obsolete. The U.S. is no longer going to be able to dictate global rules. Their control of inputs will be weak. America will be dependent on supply chains that it does not control, critical minerals that it does not possess, and foreign investors that they cannot defy. Their narrative control will be eroded. The world is no longer going to listen to them. Their monopoly on truth, morality, aspirations is broken completely by the year 2050. Multipolar epistemologies are rising even from now. America's voice already is just one among many. It's not the most credible voice. It's not the most listened to voice. And their immunity to retaliation will be fragile in 2050. Cyber war, financial sanctions, strategic decoupling, no. America is no longer going to enjoy the luxury of being able to act without consequences. And their, what we call their adaptability reserve, is going to be almost exhausted by 2050. Political paralysis, social fragmentation, unsustainable debt, crumbling infrastructure, that will choke any effort at serious reform. Not to mention there's no real desire for it. There's no will for it. Okay? So that's the dominance side of the equation of the RPI index. Now talk about dependency. America is going to be deeply dependent on foreign capital, on labor, on foreign manufacturing, on foreign resources, foreign controlled resources. And it's going to be exposed to the threat of disruption on every front, from within and from without. Their perceived vulnerability will be obvious. It will be global and it will be persistent. So what does the -7 RPI mean for the United States? It means that America, by mid-century, will no longer be the central power of the international system. It will not be feared. It will not be emulated, and it will not be trusted. It will be seen as unstable, volatile, overextended, and irrelevant to the decisions that are shaping the world's future. It's not necessarily something to celebrate or to gloat about, but it's something to understand because it changes the strategic landscape. It means the enforcement arm of financialized capital is failing. The illusion of American-led order is fading. And the real opportunity to build an alternative, equitable, sovereign, decolonized, that opportunity is now. Middle Nation doesn't just observe these changes, we prepare for them. We're trying to build the tools, the doctrine, the consciousness, and the cohesion that's going to be necessary to navigate what comes next. So now we've established that the United States, though still powerful on paper, is not using that power for itself, and by 2050, it won't even have that power anymore. The architecture of functional dominance that once underpinned the Western-led order is being hollowed out. But here's the thing. Power doesn't just vanish, it relocates. So where's it going? It's moving east and it's moving south. It's moving into the hands of a coalition that was once peripheral, fragmented, and marginalized. But today, they're consolidating, they're coordinating, and they're rising. And of course, I'm talking about BRICS. Now, I want you to understand this clearly. BRICS is not just a talking shop anymore. It's not just a slogan about multipolarity. It is becoming the functional center of the global power transition. We've measured it. If we put BRICS through the Middle Nation Relative Power Index, our system for calculating real leverage in the world, we've evaluated BRICS and we've evaluated it as a block. And what we found is decisive. BRICS currently holds an RPI of plus 27. Okay, that's super dominant. That's a super dominant rating. And it's not theoretical. That's operational. It's functional. You can identify what's really driving it. They have control of inputs. That's first. The BRICS nations collectively control the raw material base of the future. You know, oil, gas, food, rare earths, population, ports, everything. If you want to manufacture, if you want to grow, if you want to move anything, you are increasingly dependent on BRICS countries. The second big driver of why BRICS has a high score in the relative power index is what you could say is immunity and redundancy. You know, the U.S. used to rule the world by threatening isolation or by threatening sanctions, but BRICS, they're building alternatives, alternative payment systems, trade routes, currencies, even their own ratings agencies, their own development banks. The ability of the West to punish BRICS countries is decaying, it's weakening, while the ability of BRICS countries to resist and to retaliate is growing. Third, their adaptability. Most BRICS members are not what you call legacy powers. They're not locked into rigid ideological or institutional models. They're innovative. They can pivot. And most importantly, they can build because they still have young populations. So they can build. They have unexploited potential, and they have a hunger to rise. And then, according to the vector or the criteria of narrative control, well, they have legitimacy. Let's be honest. The world is tired of Western hypocrisy. The world is tired of being lectured on democracy by war criminals. They're tired of being told to trust in a system that has stolen from them for centuries. BRICS doesn't pretend to be perfect. It doesn't claim moral supremacy. BRICS just offers partnership instead of domination. That in and of itself is powerful. Harmony is powerful. And finally, BRICS has strategic cohesion. Yeah, everyone knows BRICS is diverse, but that diversity is no longer seen as a weakness. It's becoming a strength, functionally. Different civilizations, different systems, different strengths, coordinated through trade, through diplomacy, and through mutual interest. Okay, that's not a traditional empire. That's a decentralized network of sovereignty, collective sovereignty. So let me put it plainly. As the US RPI drops into negative territory, BRICS Plus is ascending into historic dominance over the next 25 years. The future of functional power will not be American. It will not be European. It will not be Western. It will be multipolar, decentralized, and led by the global South. This isn't the end of world order. It's the end of their world order. And at Middle Nation, we're not trying to stand by the sidelines. We're trying to prepare people to lead in what comes next as civilizational actors with clarity, with direction, and with sovereignty. And what comes next is the end of American functional dominance. Okay, the empire is still standing, but the lights are off. And those who understand that now are going to be the ones who shape what rises after that falls. We've talked about the collapse of American power. We've seen that the US, the United States, by 2050, is no longer going to be the axis of the international system. Not just because it declined, but because something else rose. Relative power. Something decentralized rose, diverse, aligned with the reality of a post-Western world. BRICS, the collective sovereignty of the Muslim world, so on and so on. So now let's talk about where they're heading. By 2050, BRICS will hold an RPI of plus 38. Let me say that again, plus 38. It means that by mid-century, BRICS will not simply be an alternative to Western power. It will be the gravitational center of global power. This is not projection by fantasy. This is based on measurable dynamics. The decision authority by 2050, BRICS is going to be making the rules, not asking to be included, not submitting proposals. They're going to be writing the frameworks of trade, the frameworks of conflict resolution for cross-border digital systems, for economic development. They're going to write the rules. The G7 won't be setting the global agenda anymore. The world is going to look to Johannesburg, to Riyadh, to Delhi, to Shanghai. In terms of control of inputs, well, obviously, it's total. BRICS will dominate the energy market, whether that's fossil fuels or renewable energy. It's going to control the agricultural belts that feed the world, the rare earths, the shipping corridors, the industrial manufacturing, the ports. All this is concentrated within the BRICS bloc. If you want to move, if you want to build, if you want to power anything in 2050, BRICS is going to be at the center of that process. And in terms of narrative control, okay, the West's monopoly is over. The West lost the microphone. By 2050, they lost the microphone. By 2050, you'll have media networks, you'll have academic institutions, you'll have AI systems within BRICS that are shaping public consciousness. They won't be parroting Western dogma either. They'll be articulating indigenous, Islamic, African, and Asian frameworks and Latin American frameworks. And in terms of their immunity to retaliation, well, by then, Western sanctions will be irrelevant. They'll have their own payment system. They'll have their own payment networks, their own currencies, their own capital markets. Well, they'll be sanction-proof by 2050. No one is going to be able to threaten them. No one's going to be able to threaten BRICS, not without serious cost. And their adaptability, obviously, they're young, fast-moving, future-oriented. They're going to be flexible where the West is brittle. They're going to be responsive where the West is paralyzed. They're going to be forward-looking while the West is trying to relive its past. And here's the important part. They're not going to be dependent on the West. They won't depend on the West. Their supply chains internal, their markets internal, their technologies independent and internally created, their ideology authentic, their moral legitimacy rising. By 2050, BRICS won't be asking to join the table, they will be the table. They won't seek validation from Western powers. They will be the ones to provide validation or to withhold it. And obviously, this isn't going to be some new unipolarity. It won't be imperialism under a new name. We're talking about collective sovereignty. It will be a civilizational bloc, a post-colonial, post-Western consortium of power, where values are not dictated by some decaying, out-of-touch, deceitful elite, and where their strength isn't going to be measured by missiles, but how many people want to stand with them, by how many people support them. So the West collapses inward and BRICS expands outward. But what we're trying to do with Middle Nation is to prepare, like I say, to prepare our people to thrive, not by begging for inclusion, but by building where the future actually is. This is the global realignment. And we're not just observers, we are participants. So, okay, I talked about the power of BlackRock. Well, how much power does BRICS have over BlackRock or vice versa? The answer is BRICS power is growing and it's real. I mean, let's be clear. Obviously, BRICS doesn't regulate BlackRock. They don't license it. They don't police it. They can't do that in any meaningful way. But here's what BRICS does control. The food that BlackRock invests in, the energy that BlackRock invests in and depends on, the minerals, the markets, the labor, the infrastructure that BlackRock needs in order to remain profitable. That's what we call control of inputs. And BRICS score is a 7.5 out of 10. That's a powerful position. Because you don't need to control the firm itself if you control what the firm needs to function. You understand me? The Global South's economic immunity is increasing. In the past, Global South economies were like sitting ducks. You know, Western capital could enter and exit at will and cause chaos with no consequences for them. If you didn't play by the rules of the asset managers, you could get punished. But that's changing. BRICS plus economies are building immunity to retaliation. They're creating alternatives to SWIFT. You know, they're trying to find ways to bypass the dollar. They're using sovereign development banks now instead of relying on Western financiers. So we gave BRICS a score of 6.5 out of 10 for immunity to retaliation. It's not perfect, but they're not defenseless because they can walk away. This is key. BRICS doesn't need BlackRock. Understand me. The bloc is becoming increasingly self-sufficient with internal trade, domestic investment flows, and their own regional capital structures. They're building the ability to walk away from Western capital, to disengage, to redirect, and still grow. So that's an adaptability reserve of 8.0 out of 10. That means that if BlackRock pulls out, they survive. But if BRICS stops engaging with BlackRock, well, BlackRock suffers. So what's holding them back from doing that? Well, first, they don't have decision authority over BlackRock. Their score is low. They can't pass laws that bind BlackRock. They don't control the global narrative the way that BlackRock does compared to BlackRock. BlackRock still dominates ESG discourse, for example, best practices discourse. So in terms of those types of things, we gave BRICS a score of 3.0 in terms of their decision authority and in terms of their narrative control, because they don't really have it. But even without those, their material leverage is undeniable. BRICS has a lot of power. So the overall RPI result for BRICS relative to BlackRock, their score is plus 14 over BlackRock. Okay, that's not global domination, but it is functional power, and it's growing, and it's sovereign, and it's resilient. And that tells us something critical. You don't have to defeat empire. You just have to make it irrelevant. You have to be able to walk away from it. You don't need to overthrow BlackRock. You just need to build a system in which BlackRock doesn't matter anymore. BlackRock has functional tools of discipline that it can pressure BRICS countries. You know, they can stigmatize your economy through the media, through ESG ratings, through investment ratings, and so forth. They can deny you investment. So we gave BlackRock a 5.5 in narrative control over BRICS. They have more control. They have that much control. And a 6.0 in immunity to retaliation, because let's face it, if you hit BlackRock, you might hurt yourself. But that's where the power stops. Let's be very clear. BlackRock cannot tell BRICS governments what to do. It has no decision authority over our states. Our states are still alhamdulillah, predominantly reigning over the private sector, not the other way around, not like in the West. That's important. BlackRock is kind of like those vampires in the movie Sinners, where they have to be invited in. They can't impose themselves. They can't just bust in. They have to be invited. So what BRICS is doing right now is sort of breaking the illusion that BlackRock's participation is necessary. BRICS is building local capital ecosystems, like I said. They're building alternative ratings frameworks, state-backed banks, currency swap agreements. This is all important. Development institutions of their own that don't care about ESG ratings. This means that BRICS is building their adaptability and their insulation. So we scored them an 8.0 in terms of their adaptability reserve versus BlackRock. BlackRock still has influence, but its leverage is declining in value, you know, because if you can walk away from something, then you're not being ruled by that something. BlackRock needs BRICS more than BRICS needs BlackRock. BlackRock needs access to energy, rare earths, manufacturing, labor, population, growing populations, and promised returns on capital that the West can no longer generate. So we scored BlackRock's direct dependence on BRICS as 6.0, because without profitable exposure to BRICS markets, BlackRock's portfolios will collapse into stagnation if they have to rely on the Western markets. And as BRICS becomes more assertive and potentially nationalizes key sectors, decouples from Western financial rule books, BlackRock's exposure to disruption goes up. So we scored 6.5 because, for example, China or Russia can shut the door if they choose to on BlackRock. And the perceived vulnerability of BlackRock is growing. In the global south, in the BRICS countries, in the younger economies, BlackRock is not seen as invincible anymore. It is seen as extractive. It is seen as nefarious. It is seen as colonial. So BlackRock's relative power index over BRICS is just plus 8.5. So yes, that's a moderate level of leverage. It can shape investment flows, like I said. It can manipulate perceptions. It can apply market pressure and so forth. They have some power. But this leverage only works as long as BRICS chooses to remain integrated in the BlackRock world. And BRICS is building a different world. So from our perspective, this isn't just about replacing one hegemon with another. That's not what it's about. It's about ending the era of national dominance, where firms like BlackRock could treat governments like clients, could treat populations like assets, and could treat sovereignty as nothing but a nuisance. Okay, BRICS isn't fully there yet, but it's moving. And the more it invests in sovereign capital formation, in regional financial platforms, and narrative independence, the less power BlackRock is going to have over anyone in the BRICS nations and in the global south generally. So what does all this mean? It means that the tide is turning, like I've been talking about. The tide is turning, not with fireworks, not with revolutions, but with slow, deliberate, structural realignment. And in that realignment, BlackRock doesn't disappear, but it becomes irrelevant. In the world that is being built now, irrelevance is the greatest defeat that any empire can suffer. If we fast forward again to the year 2050, okay, BlackRock is still going to exist, most likely, but it's not going to matter like it matters now. Its dominance is going to be over. Not by destruction, but by, like I say, irrelevance. And that's because BRICS, this block of sovereign civilizational powers, will have built a system where BlackRock has no leverage. The global south is going to go from obedience to ownership. That's their historical trajectory. You know, in 2025, BlackRock can punish a state with capital flight. They can punish them with narrative ESG compliance ratings and so forth. But by 2050, BRICS controls the foundations of value. They control the food, they control the energy, they control the minerals, they control the labor, they control the logistics, they control the growth markets. And BlackRock can't operate without them. That's what you call control of inputs, like I said. So on control of inputs in 2050, BRICS is a 9 out of 10. They own the supply side of civilization in 2050. In 2050, BRICS isn't just learning to play the game better, they changed the game. They rewrote the operating system of global capital by 2050. That's decision authority, 6 out of 10 and rising. Narrative control, by 2050, the global south no longer asks about ESG scores. They no longer ask for BlackRock's opinion on anything at all. In the past, if you disobeyed BlackRock, you paid the price. Your credit ratings would drop. Your investments would disappear. Your economy would suffer. But by 2050, no. BRICS is going to be immune. They don't need BlackRock's money. They won't need it. They don't need to rely on BlackRock's platforms. They won't care about BlackRock's judgment. That's immunity to retaliation. That's an 8.0 out of 10. Because you cannot be punished by a system that you were able to walk away from. And more than that, BRICS can pivot instantly. They have sovereign wealth funds. They have state banks. They have, I'm talking about by 2050, they're going to have regional financial loops. So their adaptability reserve goes all the way up to 9.5. What about their dependency? BRICS dependency on BlackRock. Well, that's going to be completely gone by 2050. In 2050, no one needs BlackRock. They don't need them to build their infrastructure. No one's going to need their capital to fund energy projects. No one's going to need their ratings to be trusted. No one's going to even trust their rating system. So we gave BRICS a dependency score of only 6 out of 30 because the vulnerability has vanished by 2050. So the final RPI score, we project that BRICS is going to hold a functional power of 33 over BlackRock in 2050. That's overwhelming dominance. Not militarily, not ideologically, but structurally. This is the end of the era of national rule. When national companies like BlackRock, without a flag, without people, without accountability, when they had the power, when BlackRock had the power to shape the world and to escape consequences of their actions, well, that era is over. Civilizational sovereignty will have returned. By 2050, what we're going to see is not necessarily the defeat of BlackRock, but it's the replacement of the context that gave BlackRock power. A new architecture. When you build new architecture, the old one crumbles on its own. When you create new definitions of value yourself, well, you regain your sovereignty. And in 2050, BRICS isn't going to fear BlackRock. BlackRock is going to fear irrelevance because it's no longer the owner of the future. The global south is. The Muslim world is. You are. And that's the real revolution.